Welcome back to the Wake Up Mission Show.
Well, thank you for tuning in to the second hour of the Wake Up Mission Show, an underground network connecting the dots for liberty. Today, we have somebody who I just absolutely adore. He's an author, lecturer, filmmaker, and he has made many successful documentaries, including writing the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, with my friend Michael J. Murphy, and he produced What in the World Are They Spraying? And he's also listed in the Who's Who of America. And he's very well respected in the liberty movement. And please go to his website, realityzone.com. Realityzone.com. G-Man, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Shalene. G-Man, I don't know what to think about that one.
I've called that to you before, and joked with you that only I could use that nickname.
Okay,
so
you've got the exclusive on that one.
yes, I have the exclusive on that one. So Ed and I, Randy, we met at a tea party through a mutual friend. And I was very honored to meet him that day because your book, Creature from Jekyll Island, talk about an awakening. And for anybody who's listening to the show who may have not read the book yet, also you can listen to you reading it online, by the way, for those who would rather do that. Tell people how The Creature from Jekyll Island came about.
Oh, boy, I don't know that we have enough time for that. Let me condense that way down. You know, it's like so many things that turn out to be important in one's life. Yeah. It doesn't start out very important, you know. And so that's what happened here. Way back in the beginning of my career, if you want to call it that, where I was trying to produce films and documentaries and radio programs to, enlighten the public about what the heck was really going on out there. I decided I wanted to do a documentary on the topic of inflation. Now, I didn't know too much about it, except I knew that the government somehow had something to do with it, and I thought I would find out. And when I found out, I would tell everybody in this documentary. So I started to do my research, and I filled up a couple of cardboard boxes with books and papers and recordings and everything I could find. And make a long story short, I never did produce the film. Other things came along, seemed more important. But some years later, 4 or 5 years later, somebody asked me if I would be willing to give a talk on the topic of taxes. And I said, well, I really don't know much about taxes, but I could talk to you about a hidden tax called inflation. Well, they like that idea. What's that all about? So anyway, I was called upon to do that little job, and I did. And I got my boxes out of the back of the cupboard and, read through all my notes and all those things. And I was amazed at how much was in there. I'd forgotten much of it. And it was an extremely important story. So it pushed it back up into my frontal lobes again. And fortunately, the small little audience that was there that evening seemed to like it a lot, and they encouraged me to put it on the road, so to speak. So I did. I polished it up, and I gave a lot of talks on the topic of money. I called it the Crash Course on Money, and those were full-day seminars eventually. It was all about the Federal Reserve and about the banking system and how money comes into being and all of that sort of thing, what gives it value, why we have inflation, what's going to happen to the dollar in the future if the trends continue, all of these themes. And then I decided that I really didn't know enough about it. People were asking me really tough questions about, like I was supposed to know what they were supposed to do with their money. And little old ladies would come up and say, well, Mr. Griffin, I just inherited this and not enough, but should I put it all into real estate, or should I take it out and bury it in the backyard and all this stuff? And I thought, gosh, I don't know the answers to those realistic questions. I know about banking and the Federal Reserve. So I stopped giving those lectures because I was a little embarrassed by not being able to have intelligent answers to these people in the audience. So I went to school. I enrolled in the College for Financial Planning, and I got my CFP designation, not because I wanted to become a financial planner, which I never did, but I just wanted to learn more about the real world of money and investments and that kind of thing. So I came out of that, and then I realized, okay, I'm ready to go. Then I really got serious about research, Shalene, and it was 7 years after that point that I finally got the book out the other end. And so you see, it was a long, tortuous journey, And one of the reasons is that I started from ground zero. I knew nothing about anything like this. In school, I didn't even have any interest in it. But when I came out the other end, I was just amazed with the information I had. And I produced this book, this 600-page book. I thought, oh my gosh, who's going to want to read this thing? I thought I'd wound up with a whole garage full of boat anchors somewhere down the line, and not even good for that because they float. And but to my amazement, my gosh, the book is just sold like hotcakes. We've never advertised it, and we've gone through, I guess, 38 printings now, and it just goes on and on.
Wow.
That's because people like me read it, and then we go out and we tell the world about it. But you spoke the truth. You spoke the truth. The real reason behind the Federal Reserve System, and the name Creature from Jekyll Island, because they were on this island off of New York, plotting this. Why? This has struck my curiosity, because what we do know is that in the late 1800s, some bankers started meeting. But how exactly? Why the Federal Reserve System, which is not a government entity? It's a private, well, I call it a cartel.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So why did they create this? Why did they take us off the gold standard?
Well, why does anybody create a cartel? All cartels are formed for one primary purpose, and that is to enhance the economic competitive position of the members of the cartel. And they do that by eliminating competition. The idea is that if you can't buy out or destroy your competitors, you join with them, and you get them all to join into your little cozy little club, and you agree not to compete with each other, and you start to divide up the markets between you. Say, okay, you're too big to knock out of the ring, so you're in. The guy over there, he's too big to knock out of the ring, so he's in. There's the three of us. Now, everybody else we can knock out. And that's what they tend to do. They knock everybody else out and dominate the field. They divide the markets up between them. You get North America, I get South America. You get pharmaceuticals, I get automobiles, whatever the deal is. They divide up the market. And they try and eliminate competition. And they do that by creating, cartel agreements to share patents and processes between firms. They fix prices and all of that to fix the market to their advantage, so that the consumer has no choice. He has to take the product or the service from that source. That's why cartels come into being, is to eliminate competition and to inflate the profit margins far above what they would be if there were free market competition. So that's the same reason that the banking cartel was formed back in 1913. It was passed into law, but the work on it was started in 1910. The biggest banks in the United States had reached the point where they were competitors, but they finally realized that they couldn't knock each other out of the ring. So they said, okay, let's form a banking cartel. No different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel. Let's just make it a banking cartel, and we'll regulate our own industry with rules and regulations that we like, very much to our liking, because it ensures our position. It allows us to control these new banks coming in. We'll control them and regulate them in the name of helping the people, but it's really regulating the competition, making sure that there was no competition between banks, serious competition. And the biggest advantage, of course, was to allow the banks to do things which would normally be considered unethical or illegal. It allows the banks to create money out of nothing, for example, and loan it into existence. A process that if you and I were to do, we'd be sent to jail. They'd be
right.
Yeah, they'd said, you're a scammer. You can't lend that money. It's not your money. You don't have any money. You just wrote a check on it. You don't have anything in the bank. You can't lend money that you don't have. And of course, they're right, but they do it all the time, and that's how banks lend money. They don't have any money to lend. They create it, and so forth. So that was all written into the rules and regulations, and that's why the cartel was created, so they could write those rules and regulations and make the things that would be illegal for us to do, make them entirely legal for the banking fraternity to do. So there, in a nutshell, is what it's all about. That's the reason for it.
even when I read your book and even when I've read other books or watched documentaries of this period, I still can't understand how they were able to do it so seamlessly, and how that the American people, I don't know if they accepted it, but there didn't seem to be a lot of protesting. So am I missing something? I mean, how were they able to implement this so seamlessly without a lot of outrage from the Americans?
Well, I think, Helene, there are a couple of elements involved in that. It was pretty seamless, I have to say. It was very slick and very little
Yes.
opposition, although there was some, but they were able to pretty well handle that along the way. We might come back to that because some of the ways in which they did handle the opposition was very shrewd and very clever. But basically, I think there were several things going for them. First of all, it was a slow process, a little bit here and a little bit there. This whole banking scheme that we're talking about, the name for it is central banking, the ability to create money and loan it into existence, all that. That didn't arise on the scene with the Federal Reserve. That was already here. All of the state banks were doing that. Everything the Federal Reserve would be doing after its creation was being done by the state banks. And that's the reason that the banking system was so messed up, because state banks were going bankrupt, people were losing their money, banks were closing their doors, investors lost everything, and that was part of the cry for reform. We need banking reform. We want to put an end to that. Well, they put an end to it by institutionalizing it and making it bigger. They didn't really end anything. They just pumped it up and made it bigger. So, and the idea of central banking came out of Europe. The Federal Reserve was copied very closely after the Bank of England. And the Bank of England itself was sort of the end of an evolutionary process that goes back several centuries. So part of the reason is that these concepts of banking were familiar to Americans and to everybody. We were born into it. It wasn't that it was just dropped on us like a big block of ice or anything like that. It's just a little change here, a little change there. And the other reason is that it seems so complicated. And there's a lot of effort made by these people, I think, to use terminology and processes that make it seem beyond the understanding of the average person. And so they really don't teach it in school, except when you want to become a banker. Then you enroll in a course and you learn about banking and currency and reserve ratios, and you get right down to the technicalities of it and step right over the principles and the fundamental concepts behind it. It was amazing to me that after I plowed through all of this and my own book was published, I started getting letters from bankers, bankers at the local level. So, I've been in banking all my life, and I didn't know this. I was blown away by that. But, the average guy in the local bank, they don't know these things. They know all about the technical side. They can make it work, but they don't understand the concepts behind it. Never presented to them. Doesn't seem necessary. Just make it work. That's all. So I think that's the other thing. And then, of course, another reality is that after a while, this banking industry has become so powerful. And so they control the media. They control the government agencies. It's what they now call regulatory capture. Where the industries capture the government agencies that are supposed to regulate them. Well, the same thing happened here, except that the banks have really, in my view, have essentially captured control of the whole bloody government. And people don't realize that. And so that makes it easier for them to pull these things off because nobody is opposing them. Nobody is arresting them. A bank will be exposed for having swindled $20 billion from the American people, and they get a big fine. They'll get a big, hefty fine, and the people say, oh, boy, those banks really got fined for that. But where does the money go? Well, the money for the federal government. The federal government took the money and bailed the banks out, gave it back to them. And the executives who pulled off that crime were given a bonus and promoted, you see. People have to understand that this thing is a criminal activity. And they don't.
Well, I think some things had changed. I think that, and I mean this, and I know you're a very humble man. You and your wife and Joan, you're very humble over at your camp. But I mean this. I think between you, Aaron, and Ron, some of us did wake up, and there was all these end the Fed rallies. Of course, Dr. Paul, when he was in Congress, had his end the Fed bill, which I always knew it wasn't going to really go anywhere because they don't want it to. There's not enough Ron Pauls in Congress. So people did wake up. And unfortunately, though, we're to the point where you're right. The banksters own everything. They pretty much all own the world. And I hope you don't take this. I don't want to put any ideas out there, but Randy and I often report on missing and dead banksters. How was it that you wrote this book? Did you get any sort of, were you ever followed? Did anything bad happen? Because your book is pretty, it's if you're not awake, it's going to wake you up. So did you have to endure anybody coming after you, any government officials at your door?
No, I haven't. I've been expecting something like that. I understand how these people operate. They go through a certain process to eliminate their opposition.
Yes.
The first thing they do is usually successful in 99% of the cases, is to ignore it. Just ignore it. It goes away because people like myself or organizations, political candidates, crusading journalists, whoever this person or group is, they usually don't have the financial means to stay in the battle. They don't have access to the media. Nobody really hears them speak. They don't read about what they have written. Or when they are presented to the public, they're presented through the filter of a Wikipedia, which is loaded with trolls in there who make sure that people like myself are always described as marginal or kooky.
Yes.
Or
yes.
conspiracy theorists or something like that. So the
Right.
average person looking for information, they'll look you or me up in Wikipedia or other sources. Now, one of those nuts, huh? And that's how they do it. And it's very effective. As I say, about 90 to 99% of the opposition just withers away. It has no following, no money, has no communication ability. So that takes care of most of it. The next thing, of course, is if in spite of that, somebody or some group survives, the next thing is to demonize them, really demonize them in the press. That's when it goes off of the Wikipedia and into the headlines where so-and-so is accused of child molesting or terrorism or, you name it, They'll come up with terrible things to charge people with. And there again, the average gum-chewing public will say, I just read about that in the newspaper. I didn't know he was that bad. He seemed like such a nice person, but now listen to this. They believe it.
Oh, he was
and that's
a
all.
good. Yeah, he was a good neighbor. He was a nice guy, and all that. Believe me, I know. I lived it. Well, Mr. Griffin, I've got a question. I've read a lot of articles in the paper. What do you say to like these, if you want to call them journalists, where they make the argument where, well, we have to have a standardized currency. The reason, and they say their reason for the Federal Reserve coming into play or into existence was, well, you had one region of the country using one currency and the other region of the country using a different type of currency, and we had to standardize it. What would you say to those people?
Well, I would say that they're wrong. I don't see any evidence for that. In fact, there's a lot of evidence for a non-standardized currency because that allows the best currency to reveal itself or to be identified. If people have no choice, if they have to take one currency, it could be the worst currency in the bunch, and they'd never know it because they have no option. The only people that want to have a standardized currency and enforce that with law are those who are afraid that currency won't stand freedom of choice. See, I'm all for a standardized currency if it is a process of a natural evolution of the competition between currencies where one is proven to be more effective, everybody chooses it. We've had standardized currencies in history. It's called gold or silver. Those are standardized currencies that have been standard over long periods of time and over large geographical areas. And they are standard not because some king or emperor said, this is the currency you're going to use or off with your head, they became standardized and universally accepted because they were good money. They had all the best qualities of money. So I'm all for standardized money, but these guys don't want it that way. They want to pass a law and say, we will create the money, and you will use our money as the standardized money, and if you don't, off with your head. See, they don't want to talk about that side of it.
Oh.
And we recently had Karen Hudis, whistleblower from the World Bank. And, on her Twitter account a couple of days ago, she tweeted that the global currency reset was, upon us. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I don't know. I've been hearing that for a long, long time. I do believe that there is a global currency reset planned, and it's inevitable probably the way things are going. And so I certainly wouldn't argue that that's an impossibility, but I don't know about setting a date on it. I think that's rather a pragmatic thing. They'll wait and see how everything plays out. In fact, I hope that because of the work that we're doing, we can even postpone it and then postpone it again and then finally make it never happen, because we know if there's a global currency reset, it's going to be an international fiat currency. That would be no different than the ones we have, except for one more defect, which is that you'll have no place to go other than that. Right now, we can jump from currency to currency, hopefully make a little escape from chaos. But once it's one currency, then there's your standardized currency they're talking about, and you have no escape.
Speaking of currency to currency, right, Randy. Ed, speaking of currency to currency, received some news a few days ago that dinar dealers, we're talking Iraqi dinar, and of course they're currency dealers, and they don't just have dinar, but they were focused. The FBI did raids on several currency dealers, especially those who dealt with dinar. Why do you think this is happening?
I don't have any idea on that one. It's a little strange to me. I know there's been a dinar movement. I was going to call it a craze, but I think that's overly unkind, because there may be something to it. I've never been much impressed by the possibility that a dinar is going to get suddenly backed by something of tangible value like gold or silver and really become anything other than another fiat currency. But a lot of people do, and so I don't want to denigrate their views on it, but I don't see why the feds would be moving in and raiding these currency dealers. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, other than maybe perhaps there might be some sort of reevaluation, or maybe they're looking into, maybe some of them are scams. I don't know. I was hoping that you well, do something, because I wasn't quite sure what to make of it.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it, but that's always funny when the government says, well, we're checking into this because we suspect a scam. My gosh, the whole Federal Reserve System is a scam.
Right.
The biggest scam of all history. And these scammers are going around and says, well, we're looking for scammers, We'll put these scammers out of business. It's ridiculous. But anyway, they get away with it.
Right, they certainly do. Now, there's been a lot of talk. In fact, tomorrow, what we've done on this show, Ed, is we've broken down. We have theme days. Today's May Day, Monday. We just do top of the news of the week. And then Tuesday we do Truth Tuesday. It's when we talk about, which you would love. We've had Michael J. Murphy talking chemtrails, geoengineering on our show. We talk about items that are truth that the media puts out as just conspiracy, and anybody who believes it are a bunch of nuts. So tomorrow I'm going to talk about what, September, the Shemitah, the jubilation, the end of Jade Helm, CERN. But there's also another quite disconcerting rumors that have been floating out there, is that September is going to be a surprise in more ways than one. And one of the things that is being mentioned is that the stock market is going to do like a depression era crash, and that the economy is going to completely collapse. Wondering if you've heard these rumors as well, and if so, what can people do to prepare for such a collapse?
Yeah, those are two separate questions, really,
Yeah.
and the division between them is more significant than it might seem, because there's no question in my mind that most of the things, these calamities that people are pointing to with alarm and predicting, no doubt in my mind that most of them are going to happen. But when they throw a date on it, it implies that they have some kind of an inside track, that they really know, and they got they sat around that, they happened to be there around that table when the date was set, and they know. And that I don't get too excited about, because I've been listening to dates on these things for many, many, many years. And the dates never happen, or most of them don't happen. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that people who get drawn into that discussion begin to look stupid in the eyes of their friends, Mm-hmm. And I think that's mainly the reason they do that, is because they want to get folks who are concerned about, really and justly concerned about what's happening. They want to get them out on a limb, so they're making all kinds of statements that eventually will come back, and it'll be like egg on their face, and it'll demonstrate to their friends that they're not trustworthy sources of information. I think that's partly the reason for all of that going around. No, that's just my speculation. I know that if I were running the other side, so to speak, I would do something like that. I would set into motion disinformation programs designed primarily to discredit those who are really on the right track. And so I suspect that some of this is in that category. But now the other question is even more important, and that is, what can you do to protect yourself? I think of it was years ago when I was just beginning to get involved in all of this. I was traveling on a lecture tour, and I've forgotten where I was. It was in the north, one of the northern states. It might have been Montana. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it was a northern state, and they get cold weather up there. And I remember talking to some people, and there were some ranchers there. And this rancher told me the story. He said, people are talking about when's the collapse coming. He said, up here, people say, well, when is the next big norther coming? And he said, we don't know when the next norther is coming, but we know it's coming, and we prepare for it now as though it's going to come today or next year. We don't have to know the date to prepare. So I thought, that's really the answer here. We don't have to know whether it's coming in September, October, or November. We know it's coming, or much of it is coming. So let's start preparing for it. Now we're back to the second question, which is, what do you do? Well, obviously, if we want to just talk about the economic sector here, which is the drift of this conversation, the best thing you can do to protect yourself is to get rid of the currencies that are going down the tubes. If you have your life savings and all of your wealth, what little or great amount there may be, if it's in terms of dollars, if it's cash in a bank, if it's a savings account, if it's in an annuity or a life insurance program that has values expressed in dollars, you're in trouble, because it's like standing on the track and you see that locomotive coming down the track. It's aimed right at you, and that locomotive is the destruction of the value of the American dollar. So anything that you have in terms of savings or wealth expressed in dollars, you stand a very high risk of losing it. So, and if you know this, why do you stay on the track? Get off the track, So that's the first thing you could do, and now that's easily said, but not so easily done. Where would you put your money? What values would you put it into? Well, that's where you need some good guidance. You need to read and get informed, make up your own mind primarily. There are different strokes for different folks. I personally like gold and silver, but there are other things. Real estate has some value as long as you can afford to pay the taxes and undergo the risk of having somebody take it from you because of some legal maneuver. Everything has its disadvantages and its advantages. I joke about this, and I haven't done it, but I think it's a good idea. A warehouse full of cheap white wine wouldn't be too bad.
I like that idea.
I prefer red, so my warehouse will have to be red.
All right. Old timers, anything of tangible value other than money, which can be created and destroyed so easily. So that's how you protect yourself in sort of a broad pen stroke answer. Um, Now, but even that won't work if the system continues the way it's going into totalitarianism. Then it won't
All
make any
right.
difference. It won't make any difference. You have gold, silver, or wine, or whatever, fine art, or anything. You've lost it all. So I think any plan to answer the question, what can you do, has got to focus primarily on how we reverse the trend and save the system and restore the concept of liberty and free markets.
I agree with you. When we're going to go into that questioning here in just a second, but what are your thoughts real quickly on Bitcoins?
Well, okay, Bitcoins, I think are very interesting from the point of view that it's caused people to think about the nature of money. Bitcoin is a challenge to currencies because it seems to be beyond the control of governments, although there's some question about whether there is some way that governments can grab hold of the technology and exploit it or prevent it. But anyway, it seems to be beyond the control of governments and banks. The technology argues that there are limited amounts that could be created, no more. Therefore, if you have a currency based on Bitcoin or some other similar system, the limited quantity means that inflation would be impossible. In fact, it means that deflation would be inevitable. So those who save will be rewarded, and so forth. So those are all good qualities. But the one thing about Bitcoins that I have a big question mark on is that it's not tangible. It's kind of like vaporware, It doesn't exist except electronically. And if the power goes out, if there's an EMP or a solar flare or whatever, a big fire, earthquake, and the power goes out and the internet goes down, where are your Bitcoins? Nothing
Right.
works. But then that's true
Right.
also of other forms of money, like the present banking system. The power goes down, internet goes down. Where's your bank account? Where's your credit card? The same thing can be said for that. But if you're dealing with gold and silver, you still have the gold and the silver, even though the internet is down. So I still go back to those old trusted means of exchanging value and creating money. But I like Bitcoins and I like all of this cryptocurrency technology that's being developed because it's causing people to think, and I think it's going to end up somewhere down the line evolving into a means of transferring purchases electronically without having to go through credit cards and through the banking system. And if that's all that it produces, I think it's a great thing.
Well, fantastic. And going back to what you said about totalitarianism, and last time I was a guest in your home, I was encouraged during that period. You had the Occupy movement for those who were not communists, because there were a lot of liberty-minded individuals that went there. You had the Tea Party was very strong. But unfortunately, since that time, boy, Ed, and I thought with the Ron Paul revolution, just the opposite would occur. But we are living, and I don't know if you saw his comments, but former President Jimmy Carter came out and admitted what I've been saying on the show since day one, we're an oligarchy. And he came out, he admitted to that. America is an oligarchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you I don't know if nobody has a crystal ball. I know this, but do you think things are going to get worse? Do you think they might get better? Do you think there's any hope? I know this is a lot of questions, but I want you to talk about the state of what we're in and what can be done.
Well, obviously things can get worse and they can get better. They could go either way, depending on what. What is the thing that would make that difference? And the only thing that would make that difference would be the extent and the speed to which the American people become enlightened and then take the next step and become active and become proactive rather than just passive in just riding the boat and seeing where it goes. And so that's the reason that you and I are doing what we're doing. We're trying to build that kind of a movement in time strong enough and in time to actually turn things around. It can be done. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it can be done. That's the important thing. And I think to put that into focus, many people have the mistaken idea that the only way to do that is to get the masses involved, to convince, to get 51% of the people to go along with something, and then you got it. But if you fall at 49%, you lose it. Well, that's kind of the thinking that's gotten us into the mess we're in. The truth of the matter is that civilizations and nations and cultures have always been driven by less than 1% of the population. And so the comment about an oligarchy is an interesting one because, that's true not only now, it was true in the beginning. And it's always been true of every system that's ever existed. There's always a small group that dominates society. And the question is, what do they do with that domination? Do they rule it as despots, or do they try and rule it as our founding fathers did, by creating a system that would divest power from even themselves and prevent totalitarianism from creeping into the system? Oligarchies don't necessarily have to be monarchs or totalitarians. They could be people who I'd like to think that we are, that if we had the power to influence society, we would design it and direct it in such a way that no one would have the ability to coerce other people to do anything except to defend their lives, liberty, and property. Everything else would be free. We want to create a free system. If we were in charge, so to speak, and there's the contradiction, how can you be in charge without forcing people? And there is the essence between individualism and collectivism. Individualists want to make things happen through influence and persuasion and freedom of choice, but collectivists want to make things happen through coercion and force, prison terms and fines and that kind of thing. But either way, there's always going to be some minority that will be forming society along one or the other of those choices. So it can be done, and it'll always be done by an oligarchy of some kind. And the question is, which oligarchy is it going to be? The one that's in there now, or the one that we can create?
Very, very, very good. Considering when we know what oligarchy is in there now, how about, what was your thoughts when the Supreme Court legislated? It was judicial activism with the marriage issue. All I could see was another step towards tyranny, yet you had people out there shouting, "Oh, now we have freedom." I'd like to know your thoughts on this.
Oh, yeah, that's a kind of a sticky, gooey can of worms in a way.
Mm-hmm.
There were two things about it. First of all, the Supreme Court is way out of bounds and has been for quite a while. And many, if not most, of its decisions ever since the Roosevelt era have been more than judicial decisions. They've been legislative. Mm-hmm. And that's just becoming more and more. And that's a problem in itself, regardless of the issue. Sometimes the Supreme Court will make a decision that I like. Oh, that was a right decision. But in the process, they wind up assuming that there's federal power over the states. I've forgotten some of the details, but there was something a little while back regarding gun control in Washington, D.C. I've forgotten the issue. But the Supreme Court said, no, Washington, D.C. could not, or some other state also, could not deny gun ownership to its citizens. Everybody says, hooray. Well, not everybody, but those who believe in the right to bear arms said, hooray, the Supreme Court was right on. But in the process, the Supreme Court took away the power from the states to make that decision, you see. So there's a plus and a minus. And so the Supreme Court and its decisions is an area of concern by itself. But the area of gay marriage and in that, I kind of feel that Ron Paul's on the right track with that one. And what the heck has the government got to do telling anybody who can get married and who can't anyway? What's the government got to do with that? The government shouldn't even be involved in that. That's a private matter. Now, when it comes to contracts, if people want to enter into a contract, whether it's for marriage or adoption or a business venture or anything, yes, they should be free to enter into a contract as long as it doesn't violate the basic laws. And those contracts should be enforced by the government, but the government should not determine what the nature of the contract should be.
Yes. Yes. Totally, wholeheartedly agree. Well, now I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump to a whole other issue because you're much more than talking about freedom and talking about economics. You also have a great documentary out there. You know, my mom, I think you knew this. She passed away of cancer back when I started first campaigning for governor. And you have a great documentary on there, a world without cancer. And especially with the geoengineering, there's an increase in cancer, especially in America. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about remedies for people as we're seeing an increase in cancer in our country.
Well, yeah, a very important topic and one that's very close to my heart. It's one of those topics that I became involved in a long, long time ago, and it's parallel in my interest to freedom issues and health issues. Are just, to me, they're almost the same thing. Mm-hmm. Because what good is freedom if you're in illness and pain and dying? You know,
right?
So you're free to be sick and dying. Or what good is health if you're a slave? You know, so the two really go together in order for the human to really fulfill his purpose, his destiny, and to enjoy a fulfilled life. So the issue of cancer certainly fits into that fabric. And as you said, I did have an opportunity to explore that topic many years ago. World Without Cancer was published, I believe, in 1974. Mm-hmm. And it was another one of those long roads that I had to travel to go from zero information to where I felt like I had a handle on the topic at least. And I'm sure it saved my life because prior to that I had no interest, no knowledge, and especially no interest in anything healthy. You know, what does the young person who is healthy care about health? You know,
right?
They think they're going to live forever and they can eat anything and drink anything and smoke anything. What the heck? This is not going to affect me. So, but anyway, so I got into it fairly early, and it did change my lifestyle somewhat. And with the help of my wife feeding me good and all that sort of thing, here I am, you know, pretty far on in years, and I'm pretty sure that I would not even be alive had it not been for my awareness of this health field. And to bring that into focus, what that really means is that I learned that the body is the best healer, and that if you have any kind of an ailment, a chronic disease, now I'm not talking about broken bones, but a chronic disease involving, you know, the breakdown of the organs and bodily functions, that the best medicine comes from the body itself. And all of the stuff that comes out of the test tubes from the pharmaceutical industry, for the most part, although it may be very profitable to the industry and there may be a huge industry built up around it, in my view, much, if not most of the chemistry that comes out of that is harmful to health rather than helpful to health. And that's the basic premise on which I have operated in my work on cancer and in other fields too. I find it applies everywhere in arterial disease, high blood pressure, diabetes. Everywhere you look where you have a chronic disease, it seems like the patented chemistry that's being offered to cure those diseases often just makes it worse. And
yes.
At best, it just holds it at bay. And so I don't know why I went into all of that except to say that that's what I learned about cancer. And I found that there was a substance, at least, there are many, but I found at least one, and it wasn't that I discovered it, but I learned about it, called amygdalin, sometimes called Laetrile or vitamin B17, which is found in nature. And the tip was that everywhere you look in the world where in cultures and societies where cancer is almost unheard of, like in Hunza. You look in these places, Hunza, the Vilcabambas, the Navajo Indians, the Aboriginal Eskimos. There are places around the world that historically have no cancer. In every case, you look at the diets of those people, and you find it's very rich in this thing called amygdalin. And then you learn the chemistry, how amygdalin works. It breaks down into it releases cyanide in the cancer cell, only in the cancer cell, but not in normal cells. And you think, wow, this is an amazing mechanism of nature, and it's a natural control for cancer. And if only people understood that the answer to cancer, as with most other of these terrible, terrible diseases, is to go study nature very carefully and follow her directions. That's what I learned.
You know, and it's hard to find B17 Latrell in the United States. I mean, you can order it online. You can get it in Mexico. And isn't that interesting that the FDA is pretty much well ensured that it's hard for Americans to purchase this here in this country? So you're saying it's found in some foods. Would that be fish? What type of diet?
Okay, well, it's found in about 1,200 different edible plants. Really, it's ubiquitous. You find it in grasses and a lot of plants. I mean, lima beans used to have it until they bred it out of the lima beans because it has a bitter taste to it. But the best source for it is in the seeds of certain fruits, the rosacea family of fruits. That means the plums, the apricot, and the peach seeds. Those all are very rich in amygdalin. Apple seeds also are rich, and so it's easy to find in nature. You don't have to go to Mexico to get it. Although if you want the purified form and the concentrated form for clinical cancer treatment, then of course you've got to get dosages that are higher than what you can obtain from nature. So that's when you go and you start looking for tablets and injectables.
Well, I happen to know a lot about, have plum trees and apricot trees on the property, but those seeds are hard. They're rock solid.
Actually, those are the pits. Yeah, you have to crack open the hard pit, and then inside there's a soft seed. It's very much like an almond. It looks like an almond. In fact, the almonds used to be bitter almonds. They used to also be a source of amygdalin until they too have been hybridized. Well, actually grafted. The almond trees are all grafted trees now. But at the root, near the ground of every almond tree in the California orchards, you'll see that the bark changes its color and texture because they're grafted trees. The rootstock is what we might call bitter almond. And if those were allowed to grow, the almonds would indeed be bitter, and they'd be loaded with amygdalin. But the almonds that have come out of the grafted stock are sweet, and they have no amygdalin in them. So that's the way. That's one of the reasons. That's the reason the modern man is getting cancer, because his food supply has been gradually altered, so that the natural access to these things has disappeared.
Very interesting. And of course, we're being sprayed by, everything as well, which doesn't help matters any. So moving on now, Ed, was your first project the Noah's Ark project? Was that your first one?
The Noah's Ark project? Oh, no, that came way down the line. My first project in all of this was back in 1964. That was the publication of my first book. It was called Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. That was published in 1964. And that's how it started.
Speaking of the United Nations, I'm not sure if you've heard. I know Michael, our friend Michael Murphy, and I chatted about this a few days ago, and that the United Nations, there's a big, huge summit. I'm sure because you're so very awake, with all these world leaders, the Pope, and of course they're citing that it's about the environment and global, climate change and all of that. But it's said that they're going to do a pact with the United Nations to make it the one world government. That's really the objective. And have you heard this? And if our own government is part of it, how do we get out from underneath this?
Well, oh, yeah, that's the hard question at the tail end of it. But first of all,
Yeah.
the United Nations is the world government in building. It's been intended. That's what it was intended to be when it was formed, and it's taken a long time to gradually move it in that direction. I would say it's about halfway there now.
Yeah.
And whatever you want to call it, world government or the new world order or whatever. I get to laugh. Some people sometimes say to me, well, Mr. G, when is the new world order going to be here? When will it happen? I say, look around you, my friend. It's here.
It's here.
It's here.
Yeah.
It's been here for many, many years. It's just getting more and more visible with the passage of each year and the passage of more laws. The wall is being built higher and higher, but it's here. There's not going to be some day they'll ring the bell and say, well, at noon, now it'll be the New World Order. So the United Nations is the world government, and it's just waiting for primarily two things. It's waiting for an international currency so that no nation will be able to have its own independent funding. And the other thing will be an international military force, the so-called peacekeeping force that it has. But then no nation will be able to escape the military effect of a UN decision. And that's what disarmament is all about. It's not about disarmament. It's about the transfer of armaments from all nations to the UN. That's what disarmament means. And, of course, once those two things happen, and then that's the end of the line. But they're working on it. They're working on it.
Oh, they're definitely working on it. Oh, we're very close. We're very close. So what can we do once we are, because it seems like it's just right around the corner.
Yeah, well, it seemed that way to me for years, and I have to say that had I given up when I first thought it was all over, or feared that it would be all over, that would have been many years ago. In fact, I have to tell you the truth. In the late 1960s, I thought, well, this can't go on any longer. This is really nearing the end. And had I given up and headed for the hills or whatever people do when they give up, well, just think all those years between then and now, I would not have been able to do anything. I wouldn't have written any books. I wouldn't have enlightened anybody, or a few people at least. And I don't think that this movement that we now see would be anywhere near as strong as it would be if or would be stronger, I should say. The movement today is stronger than it would be if people like myself and others had given up back in the 60s or 70s.
Well, thank God. Well, that was when we were born. So thank God, I have to tell you, because you're one of the individuals that woke up. Now, unfortunately, and see, you're one of those individuals that you could sit back and just listen to for hours and hours. I have to say this. And but we only have a couple minutes now. So is there any final words? And first of all, thank you. I know how busy you are. Oh, your wife is so lovely. She's so sweet. Between your wife and all the work you do, people are constantly calling you. I've been in your home a couple of times, and you are a busy man. So I appreciate. Yeah, I really appreciate the time you took out to be on our little show here. Trust me, we have thousands of listeners. So, and I guarantee this will be one of our highest rated shows. So it's important that you do this, and we appreciate you. So any final comment? Again, realityzone.com. But any final comment that you have?
Yes, I do have. And I think it's important to know that all is not lost. We have some very tough times coming ahead of us. There's no question about that. But there is a possibility of turning this around. There is a plan. There is a way to do it if we'll just get busy with it and do it. And that's the reason that we created an organization called Freedom Force International. We don't have time to go into all of that, but believe me, folks, if you're looking for the plan, it's workable, it's already building, it's making momentum now, and you want to become part of this, then that's where you need to go. And that's the other website. Oh, by the way, we have a new website being built, so you'll see some construction going on there, but you get the idea very clearly. And the organization is called freedomforceinternational.org. And the website, the website is WP. freedomforceinternational.org.
Oh, fantastic. And if you have Joan email that out too, we can get it to all of our listeners. We can put it on our own website so that our listeners can go and just click on it easily.
Okay, great. Well, that's it. And the only other thing is if you folks want to hear what we're doing here on a daily basis, we publish something that used to be called Unfiltered News, a weekly news report.
Yes.
And as of last Friday, it was changed. We now have a new name. It's called Need to Know. So, yeah,
awesome.
Need to Know. Yeah,
that's great.
And you can go on. That's www. Or just go in and type needtoknow.news. That's a new extension, NEWS, and so it's now needtoknow.news, and you can see what we're doing on a daily basis.
Gee, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I can't say enough about you. Appreciate it. Unfortunately, our time is over. This has been the Wake Up Mission Show. Join us tomorrow for Truth Tuesday when we're going to talk CERN, Shamika, and in the second hour, our guest is Dr. Shirley Moore. Thank you, Ed. I appreciate you.
Thank you for spending your time with us on the Wake Up Mission Show.